Hello and welcome back everybody to Environmental Science 101 for our final section in this unit. We talk biodiversity in Arizona, right? Including our great horned owl. Okay, so our Sonoran Desert is the term for it. And it covers this area here, right? So all the way through the Gulf of California, all the way down through what we would call northwestern Mexico. Here we have Phoenix, right? Extends down to the southeast and all the way up to the northwest. Bordered by deserts on many sides, and we'll see a photo that clarifies this, as well as mountain ranges. Okay, so this is an ecoregion, and if you're thinking to yourself, oh my god, not another term, you don't need to remember this term or memorize anything, but that's what it's called. It's an area where ecosystems share similarities. Cool. It's got the greatest species biodiversity of any desert in North America, right? So from now on, if you have people who are in the Mojave in Las Vegas or, in other deserts, like the Great Basin Desert in Utah, you can tell them that yours is better so long as you live in Phoenix and that theirs is worse, and you can back it up, right? You'll have the stats, right? 60 plus species of mammals, lots of birds, amphibians, reptiles, fish, and plants, right? Can't overstate the importance of that. Huge biodiversity in the Sonoran Desert region, and we can ask ourselves the question of why, right? So why would this one have a greater biodiversity overall, species biodiversity specifically in this case, but also ecosystem biodiversity, and we'll see why. Why would it be so much better than the other deserts? And, the first answer is obviously because I live here, but also because of these elevation differences, right? Lots of differences in elevation. And this is something that I suppose when I moved out here, I noticed being the most stark going up to the McDowell Mountains just close by, right? That you move your level of elevation from, ground level, where we are here in Phoenix, right, up to a little bit higher in elevation, and everything changes in terms of the ecology, right? You really don't have to get more than a couple hundred feet up and you get a totally different ecosystem. And then you go a couple hundred feet up more and you get something else entirely, right? There's no frost, right, which would kill a lot of the plants, especially. A lot of them don't like frost. That's a very critical dividing line, and you essentially get 0 days of frost out of the year, pretty much, right? Maybe a few in the winter. In a broadly subtropical climate, right? Warm conditions are going to be good for life, broadly speaking. That's not just true here in the desert. That is true worldwide. You get more life closer to the equator. As far as why there are elevation changes, so we'll keep this short. So this, all the way through this area of the United States, is part of what is called the Basin and Range Geologic Province. As a result, we have these long linear mountain ranges, and I'll get out of the way for this, separated by valleys in between. As a result, you get a ton of elevation changes all over the place, and not necessarily just, some isolated mountains and then everything else is a plateau, right? Because you have these series of alternating mountain ranges and flat valleys, it ends up being really good for getting a huge variety of life. Okay. What are some of the local impacts, right, that we as human beings in Phoenix or in Arizona might have on the Sonoran Desert? This is going to be multifaceted, right, and it's going to be a complicated discussion. Part of it has to do with water diversion, right? So taking water that would flow into some sort of riparian area, which has, huge ecological benefits, very biodiverse, and diverting it somewhere else, right, as we have sprawl and we have development and we have need for water elsewhere. Groundwater pumping, generally speaking. So we don't need to get into the weeds on hydrology, but we could just notice, right? So we have regular, and then we have pumping. And as a result of pumping out of this well, right, the water level beneath the surface of the land has gone down dramatically for all these plants. So what is going to happen for trees here who maybe don't have roots deep enough? Yeah, it's not good. So now, to be clear, right, water is something that people need, all right? Ultimately, what this is all about is helping people to meet their needs. At the same time, right, we have to acknowledge that there's a cost to this, right? So yes, people need water, and getting the water is a good thing, right? And water is something that we need for so many reasons. At the same time, you would be naive to ignore, right, damages elsewhere, which also affect human beings. It's a trade-off. Fencing, right? And this would include border fencing, but any fencing broadly, right? So we talked about habitat fragmentation, how if you have a population and you right, introduce fencing, especially for migratory animals, this can make it difficult for them to survive and thrive. Mining, right, especially improperly done mining or mining where there is pollution and folks who are looking the other way, tends to be much better done this way, or these days, I should say, than it was in the past, but impacts of this are huge. And then off-road vehicle use. I'm not going to go into this too much, right? Recreation is good. We want people to have recreation. At the same time, if we don't measure and acknowledge these trade-offs and kind of figure out how much damage it's doing, then we're suckers, all right? We wind up blind, and we're going to have less of everything in the end than if we were just serious and tried to measure things and take stock as best we could of the impacts on the environment. I wanted to throw in one example, right, which is, I guess, near and dear to me, right, is this thing. You can see it all over campus. It typically starts to bloom in about February and blooms for sometimes months afterward, right, and then goes dormant necessarily through the winter. But this stuff is bad, all right? So this is an invasive species. Actually, you might remember if we go all the way back to, I think it was the second slide, maybe the entire presentation back in section 1, right? We had this field of yellow that was just dominated by one plant on one side, and then we had the really pretty shot of the Sonoran Desert with the nice red mountains in the background, okay? It's this stuff, right? This stuff is really bad. It's a big problem. So this would technically be called globe chamomile. Stinknet or stinkweed is a more common name for it. Part of the sunflower family, it's an annual, right? So life cycles of less than about a year. Starts to bloom in February, and once it gets to be February, you can see entire swaths of the desert all over the place, which just have this unnatural kind of yellow color. It smells bad. I've actually never smelled it. I don't know, maybe I just don't have the capacity for it, but people say it smells bad. It's where the name comes from. It tends to be this really bright, horrible yellow. Originally native to South Africa, it was brought to California, how the story goes, right, for ornamental and decorative reasons for its color, and then gets out and spreads. So was it intentional? Well, it was intentional to bring the plant species to somewhere where it's not native, right? Unintentional that it gets out. Not a good thing, and has made huge strides since 1990. This outcompetes local stuff and spreads and spreads and spreads and reproduces, and also it makes really, really great kindling for wildfire. So whenever it becomes summertime and this stuff dies and dries up, it covers the whole ground and is really flammable, right? So you wind up with pathways for wildfire and brush that would not have been there before, right? Because this stuff does not just come in patches, it covers the whole ground. It's not good. And just as a sort of specific example, in the McDowell Mountains Preserve, right, there was a volunteer effort to get community members together and go out and pull this stuff up. You know, I wouldn't want to diminish the importance of ecological work being done like that, right? But this is a losing battle, right? Sooner or later, either you pay an enormous cost, an almost impossible cost to get rid of this stuff, or it takes over, right? Can't be reversed. Okay, I hate to end on such a downer note, but that's kind of where we have to be with this. Big questions for the unit, right? What is biodiversity and what are those three types? Could we give an example of each or an explanation, right? What are the benefits of biodiversity from both the ecological perspective on the natural sciences side and in the economic perspective from the human side? And could we recognize the different types that those benefits come in? How do human beings impact biodiversity? We talked about those different ways, and which human activities have the greatest impact or effect? And then finally, what gives the Sonoran Desert such a high level of biodiversity, both in terms of environment diversity and in terms of species biodiversity? Okay, that is all I have for this unit. Thank you so much.